Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, post-lunch sessions, I think it's a little challenging also, but a very warm welcome to you all for this session on safeguarding investments in disaster-resilient infrastructure through strengthened governance. This session has been co-organized in partnership with the UNDRR office. It will begin with sharing the experiences of implementation of the global methodology in the 4 pilot countries which were selected, that is Bhutan, Chile, Madagascar, and Tonga, followed by the second part of the session, which will showcase the opportunities for achieving resilient infrastructure and highlight the case studies on the good practices, tools, and guidances developed so far. I'm pleased to introduce to you the moderator of this session, Ms. Urvi Goswami, who is an assistant editor with the Economic Times. She writes about climate change as well as issues related to environment, energy transition, and sustainability. May I request Urmi to come on the stage, please?
Thank you, Neha. Thank you, Neha, for the introduction. I'll begin off by inviting the panelists to take their place. Mr. Luis Doñas from Chile. He is the head of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of the National Disaster Prevention and Response Service. Ms. Bhavna Chetri, Chief Urban Planner of the Department of Human Settlement, Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport, Bhutan. And of course, Mr. Elisahar Rakotoshen Sheheno, Director of Resilience Promotion, Self-Help Prevention and Emergency Management, Government of Madagascar. We have an empty seat in between. There is, unfortunately, the representative from Tonga won't be able to join us, so therefore, hence the empty seat. But look at it this way, it's neatly balanced. Welcome to everybody for this post-session lunch, which, of course, as Neha explained, can be a bit challenging. I will try, and I'm sure my panelists will find a way to keep you all happily engaged in this post-lunch session. We have spent a good part of this 2 days now talking about investment into resilience. This session's job is literally to focus on that unsaid portion, which is governance, so critical to ensuring that investment flows into resilience, but investment stays in for resilience. And how critical it is to invest in resilience is evident from the fact that if we don't, we are talking about damages worth 732 billion every year. That's a whole lot of money. But of course, we also need a whole lot of money to ensure that we can, do the investment in resilience that is required. And for that, of course, you need governance. And talking about the governance structures is what we are going to focus on. As Neha mentioned, in the first part of the session, for which I've invited these lovely people to be on stage with me, we will be looking at this a global methodology that has been developed by ICDRI and the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. They're working together to strengthen governance for infrastructure resilience. And it is in conversation about this implementation of this global methodology that I will now invite Mr. Luis Doñas to start off to give us a sense of the experiences from his country, that's Chile. And so let me start off by asking you very simply, what is your experience of this implementing or framing this, working on this methodology?
Thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation for Chile to actually share the experience we've been having in the application of this methodology. I would say the first thing is just to apprise the evident fact that we might get the funding, we might get the international partners, we might get a lot of people involved, but in the end, it is the governments who actually implement and actually place infrastructure. So it's a key partner, and there are quite some challenges in terms of infrastructure as a whole, in terms of implementation of any project or any agenda for resilience. The first thing, of course, we all heard about this, is the sort of silo approach from the different sectors that compound the infrastructure pipeline in general. So one of the things we've found through the application of the methodology is, first, we've been able to consolidate the ecosystem, an intersectoral ecosystem for people to actually start talking among themselves. And this is, sounds almost evident, but in practice it's not. In countries such as Chile, which do have a strong presidential authority, things tend to be very silo-like in terms of the way different sectors and ministry carry their work about. So, such realities as such parliamentary systems, for example, they do have a strong cabinet level, which many different countries do not have. So this was the first sort of step to getting this ecosystem together, talking and working. We as a service, Senapred, we are in charge of actually coordinating this under a new law, this more organic system, among other topics dealing with resilience in infrastructure. So in the immediate impact, we have seen that through this project, the collaborative relationships among ministries has strengthened to the point in which we actually were able to devise certain triggers that actually had cascading effects, which had not been pinpointed before, and therefore relationships among these different ministries could be harnessed.
So basically the framework actually got you to move out of your silos to be more collaborative.
Yes.
So that's like a big plus. I will come back to the challenges when I come back to you next, but now I'll ask Elisa whether if he can give us a sense of the experience that Madagascar has had in implementing this framework, this methodology.
Thank you for this question. Firstly, we thank CDRI for the invitation, and it's a great honor for me to share with you our experiences in terms of resilience infrastructure. In response of your question, first of all, it is essential to emphasize that with regard to the implementation of the overall methodology in Madagascar, we are currently in the first stage, notably stage 1 and 2. As a result, there is not yet any real feedback as far as the implementation of this methodology is concerned. Apart from that, several key points were raised during the launching workshop. Furthermore, the workshop played an essential role in bringing together resource persons from various institutions for the project. They were able to discuss about the scope of their activities through their respective interventions. Likewise, several actors immediately provide the contacts of other required resource people for the implementation of the study. Concerning the governance, the CPGU Prevention Emergency Management Unit is one technical permanent agency in charge of strategical aspects of disaster risk management on Prime Minister's Office of Madagascar. Its mission is to provide support for strengthening sectoral resilience and to promote the integration of disaster risk reduction into sectoral development policies. Thus, through the various projects it has implemented, the CPGU has taken the initiative to identify the most vulnerable sectors and support them through the development and popularizations of the standards and codes for the construction. The objectives are to preserve the infrastructure, to protect the users and the investment, as well as having a single national reference system for hazard resilient construction. For the construction of infrastructure more resistant to climatic hazards, agriculture, roads, housing, and drinking water supply are identified as priority infrastructures that need these construction standards, resilient to climatic hazards. Those tools provide guidelines for construction, rehabilitation, reconstruction, maintenance, and monitoring of infrastructure based on climate risks. As the CPGU's mission is also transversal, it works in close collaboration with ministerial departments for the development and implementation of these standards. And CPGU wants to work also with the academic formation and university to capitalize the results of the research about the resilience of infrastructure.
Thank you so much. Bhavna, I'll come to you next. I have the same question, really, to try and understand if you could tell the audience about the experience that Bhutan's had in implementing this framework.
Thank you. First of all, I, on behalf of the Royal Government of Bhutan, would like to thank the Government of India, the ICDRI, and the UNDRR for this platform and also for the project that we are undertaking at the moment. For Bhutan, this global methodology has been extremely helpful. It brought together all the key stakeholders who are involved in infrastructure development. And together, I think we'll be able to foster a shared vision for infrastructure resilience. So we are adopting a collaborative approach to address all the pressing issues of climate change and natural hazards. So we've been together, since we've been working in groups, we have looked at all the weaknesses and strengths of all the sectors, of our respective sectors, as well as cross-cutting issues, and we have assessed the weaknesses, strengths, and gaps, and we have prioritized our areas for intervention and investment. So in that way, it has been a really useful exercise that we carried out for the first time, so we had not done anything like that in any of the projects before. And also, after completing this exercise, we have not completed it yet. We are still, we've done only 3 steps, so we are yet to complete 2 more steps. But from whatever we have done till now, there's an increased awareness for sure, and also a better understanding of disaster resiliency, the need to integrate disaster resilience and resilient infrastructure in our policies, plans, and programs. So we also know now that there's a need to maybe review some of our policies. Maybe we need to integrate some of our policies. There are many, and from the exercise that we have carried out, we've been at least able to figure out that there are some policies that need to be reviewed and integrated and make them more implementable. So that's...
Thank you. Mr. Donis, I wanted to come back to you actually to ask, when I'm listening to all 3 of you, one thing comes across is that this project, this framework, implementing this framework has helped getting out of the silos. And that sounds like a great win. And I'm wondering that in the process, what were the challenges? Because it's a transition from a siloed approach to a collaborative approach. What were the biggest challenges that were faced?
Okay, thank you. I would say that challenges actually have turned, since we are in the final stages of the implementation at the national level of the project and the methodology, actually have turned rapidly into proposals. So I might actually tackle those challenges through these 4 main issues that actually have turned into proposals. The first one was a matter of language. Each sector at its moment and in its own workings has its basically language and standards. One of the main things is that what we're talking about, where we're talking resilient infrastructure. So that first element actually sets the standard, a common standard finally, to actually be applying for international funds or actually going to more challenging stages such as pipelining projects that might be helpful for tackling cascading effects, for example. One of the other things is that the challenges is institutionalizing governance for the different sectors, this integrated ecosystem to actually be acknowledged as an existing part of the government body. So getting to that point in which you can see this is set up and working is quite a challenge. So one of the elements, that there was a very interesting idea that actually came out of the group and the discussions, was to actually build a resilience academy for the entire actors. I would say that would play lovely, for example, with the IRAX initiative of CDRI and other initiatives by UNDRR. So you have there, of course, a baseline of knowledge that's being sort of attached to building this institutionality. A second element that's very, very important is that, at least in the case of Chile, you can actually go through this national review, but Chile is very diverse in terms of different ecosystems, both socially, governmentally, but also, of course, naturally. So the mapping of hazards is quite different in different sectors, and this is going to happen with other countries, middle-sized countries such as Chile. So right now, we're in the task of finalizing the national level application and actually rapidly moving into a subnational application of the methodology. And this is, of course, going to bring much insight into countries like shaped countries that actually will need to, in order to get meaningful results, to scale down and get the other part of the equation, the bottom-up feeding of the system. I would say that in fourth place, one of the big challenges that stems out this common normalization, the need for not to normalize standards and language, is data. So one of the big ideas, and actually we're looking for pathways to go and tackle this issue, is developing a common national platform for data assessment and actually for decision-making in infrastructure. So just out of those three main challenges, we have 4 identified pathways and tasks ahead. And of course, part of our endeavors for the time coming is going to be just to instrumentalize those into projects, but also collaboration initiatives with other countries, with UNDRR, with CDRI for sure.
So what you're basically saying is challenges that existed in implementing the framework are now actually become opportunities.
Yes, and I would say that's sort of part of the beauty of getting everyone together, and may I say hyped about the idea, are actually working together, because that's when you're able to actually see clearly what these triggers that actually do unfold cascading effects, or where you actually find where you have compound risk, how you can get it together.
Right.
So how one leads to the other and to the other and to the other. And this means norms, not only actors,
right.
Of course, that's the baseline, but also what, basically laws, what procedures,
you need a common thread running. It's not like different people. It has to become like a symphony, right?
Exactly, and this is my last point. Once you get all the technical, the technical part of it, the technical actors together and talking the same talk, then it's easier to go to the next challenge, which is convincing the political authority.
Right. Thank you so much for that kind of insight and really that hopeful note. Because when we speak disaster resilience, we don't always think in terms of forward-looking hopefulness, but we see that from Chile's experience, and may that be the experience everywhere. Bhavna, I wanted to ask you something before I come to Alisa about trying to understand where do you see, what are the things that you saw not only as challenges, but as gaps, perhaps, you think the framework could address or didn't address or help you identify, if you can sort of take us through that.
For us, I think the biggest challenge is capacity at the moment, considering that there are only around 700,000 of us. So we definitely lack the technical capacity. And of course, the issue of inadequate funds is always there. I think it's not only in Bhutan, anywhere else also. So those two are the biggest challenges. Now through this project, after we complete all the steps of this GM, then I think whatever challenges and gaps that we have assessed will probably be addressed, and our action plans will obviously be implementing all our action plans. And I'm sorry, I hope I got your question.
Yes, you were, because I was asking you, what is it that you saw or what you didn't expect to see as a challenge or a gap, which this framework helped you identify?
Yes, and the other thing was, like you mentioned, we've always been working in, of course, we do have a lot of consultation meetings, but at the end of the day, when it comes to preparing our action plan, we always do it in silos. I think that's a very common problem everywhere. But here, what happened was, when we were carrying out this the stress test exercise, we worked on our respective sectors, but we were also asked to look at other sectors, assess their weaknesses. So in the process, there are a lot of things that we learned, and in fact, we're able to help each other. And we always feel that our sector, for me, human settlement sector is the most important, maybe. But after the exercise, I realized that energy, school education are equally important. So that's when we had to give the weightage and all. Sometimes, and I wasn't surprised when the other sectors scored more than my sector. So that was, personally, for me, it was really useful because I was involved in that exercise.
Right.
So yes, we are really looking forward to completing it and implementing it.
Okay. Elisa, what I wanted to ask you was, now you're in the process of implementing this framework, but what is it that you think is needed for governments to do more, to governments to actually incorporate resilience into infrastructure planning, disaster infrastructure planning and practices? If you could sort of give us the sense from Madagascar, what is it that is needed?
Thank you for your question. Currently, 5 codes, standards in the following sectors: building, drinking water supply, road, agricultural infrastructure, and the traditional hut are available and have decrees taken by the Council of Government in order to give them a binding character and to legitimize the implementation of their provisions. The implementation of resilient infrastructure practice requires strengthening the synergy between the different actors. The preliminary reports of the study highlighted potential collaborations with which have not been initiated yet between the different actors. Also, with the view to more fruitful exchange in the future, it would be interesting to proceed with a participatory approach. Starting with holding certified training on infrastructure resilience, once trained, actors will be able to better understand and then collaborate to establish synergy of activities. Also, such exchanges will help them to become more cooperative in the data collection, which is part of the study. Memoranda of understanding have been established between the CPJU and the ministerial departments and organizations that are concerned with the implementation of these standards in order to have more coordination and impact in their applications. For example, we had a memorandum of understanding with the Development Intervention Fund in the context of the construction of schools and basic health centers, with the idea of ensuring that these infrastructures are resistant to climatic phenomena. There was also a memorandum of understanding with regional airports to relocate the inhabitants of a village affected by the extension of Nusibe Airport. More than 50 huts using improved traditional hut construction techniques were built in the new relocation site. As part of strengthening infrastructure resilience, the CPGU always try to work with different technical and financial partners to promote the implementation and popularization of existing standards and directives. Through the new project that we will implement, we also plan to develop standards for other critical infrastructure, such as electrical infrastructures and energy production plants, and last, telecommunication infrastructure. Therefore, the implementation of this project in Madagascar will make possible the determination of infrastructure vulnerability and lead to the possibility of setting up an insurance system for infrastructure facing climatic hazards. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor for questions, but while you're gathering your thoughts to ask a question, I thought I will come back to you, Luis, again, and just basically two things. One is, of course, what more do you think needs to happen to help governments address, to bring resilience in? That's one. And every time I heard you, you spoke about the diversity in Chile. Of course, each country has its own peculiarities. But what do you think could be the lessons of, or if you had to sort of be offering advice to other countries, what do you think people could learn from Chile's experience?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And actually, it sort of builds up to the takeaways. Right? So I would like to actually say there's not one size fits everyone. I mean, we know that. But one of the elements to consider is actually, as a first thing, the importance of building this ecosystem, this multi-sectoral ecosystem, through whatever means a particular government or reality actually shows as an opportunity. The second element is to assess whether it's going to be needed or not to downscale the application of the methodology to a subnational level. It might be the case, it might not. In most of the middle-income economies and middle-sized countries, probably will be the case. But one thing that I would say it's key is to understand that the scale-up capacity building is needed at this point. Just to transversalize knowledge, to make common standards, or whatever the other need for actually consolidating these ecosystems might be actually apprised in observing the reality. So out of that, I would like to state three key points, which the first one is to try not to reinvent the wheel. There is evidence, there is experience around that actually be shared among countries in terms of pathways, in terms of standards, in terms of risk profiles that could actually work. And that means sort of taking our minds out of this modeling, out of thin air, and just trying to develop practical knowledge. If there's one thing infrastructure people do know, is that when it comes to terms, it is very practical. One second element is that we need to find specific funding tracks for developing DRI. The actors there are quite specific in terms of private sector. Most of the services provided by infrastructure are actually administered in most of the countries by private actors. So that's really key. And also establishing, some common level ground with the IFIs. And that means, and that's part of capacity building, that we all need to start talking project language. What do we mean by a sustainable project? Who are the people who need to be trained and need to be speaking to each other to develop these initiatives? Of course, this could go nationally, this could go subnationally, this could go regionally. but the need for this shared sort of critical mass of language and capacity is, I would say, paramount at this point.
Thank you. And Bhavna, I was wondering if you could give us a sense from your perspective, from Bhutan's perspective, what would be, something that you think other countries which will implement could draw upon from the experience that Bhutan has had? Again, of course, one size doesn't fit all, but on the other hand, there's much more that unites us than divides us. So what is it that we can, other countries can learn?
For Bhutan, we have a slightly different approach when it comes to planning and development. I'm sure most people in the room would know that we go by the concept of GNH, gross national happiness, more than the GDP. So in that sense, whenever we are formulating our policies, the very first step in the concept notes itself, there's a screening. And environmental preservation, conservation, resiliency is one of the most important domains and also an indicator. So till our policy fulfills all these 9 indicator of GNH, it doesn't get through. So in that way, it will get shelved if it's not there. So maybe that would be one thing that Bhutan would like to share. And other than that, if I talk about this particular project, the GM, the global methodology is a really comprehensive framework. And going forward, we feel that maybe we can also make it country-specific. For instance, we accord a lot of importance to tradition and culture in Bhutan. And in that sense, our, like our heritage monuments, these are very important for us, not only in terms of social perspective, but also from the economic point of view. A lot of investment is made in building and maintaining, preserving these monuments. And so when we were carrying out this exercise, we realized that the building components, from the building perspective, this could be included maybe in future projects. And because we are going to do it for Bhutan, we have already recommended it to the CDRI and UNDRR teams. And for us, this is very important, so we'll do that. And also, I think like maybe there's a need also to deep dive into certain sectors such as water, because water focuses mostly on water supply and stormwater. And in Bhutan, flooding is a recurrent issue. We invest a lot in flood management, in flood infrastructure. So we feel that you really need to deep dive and then include all components of water and just not few. The other thing is what we're doing is we're also looking at land use planning and specifically climate smart land use planning. So here it's more of a policy perspective here. But we feel that land use planning can become a function in itself and not just from the policy perspective. Otherwise, it sometimes doesn't get implemented. But if it is there as maybe a system or a function, then it'll be easier for us to implement. So these are some of the things that we would like to share.
With this, of course, I would like to thank all of you for being here and sharing your experiences, the positives and what more could happen. And thank you again, and thank you very much. Sorry, I made a mistake. Please do forgive me for that. I forgot to look around and see if there were questions. Is there a question? There's a gentleman at the back. Could you just get a mic? Oh, sorry, there's a lady here. Sorry. Could you just introduce yourself, and if there is anybody specific you want to address a question to?
Thank you. I'm Susan Wizialko with Global Infrastructure Finance. The question is open to each of the panelists, please. I wanted to ask, you've done all this work to improve governance, coordinate ministries to accomplish specific objectives. Have you spoken with the rating agencies at all to inform them of your progress, and have you gotten any benefit from them with regard to your ratings?
Could I ask Bhavna, could I direct it to anyone? In the interest of time, could I direct it to you? Sorry, if you have had any discussions.
Have you discussed with the rating agencies who rate your government bonds?
Rating agencies, if you have any discussions with rating agencies, have you had that in Bhutan?
Have they given you credit for the work that you've done on improving your internal governance?
I mean, for this particular project, We are actually still in the process of, we just started like, I think maybe 2 months ago. So
maybe it's too early in the
Yes,
process.
it's
Luis,
too
has anything from Chile on rating agencies?
Well, it's part of, one of the deliverables of the project is actually sort of a roadmap of different activities. That is one of them. And that's actually sort of venturing into previously not, a path that not been transited from this perspective. So that's going to be a challenge. That's going to mean an additional sort of challenge as well. And we all know that it's part of the tricky part of the government to bring the finance minister or the treasury into the mix and commit it with the cause. But yet, yes, it is there. It's not yet done. But it's part of the implementation while we're transiting to the subnational level to get the national level recognized, acknowledged. And that means also, of course, going to the rating agencies and talking to the finance people.
There was another question. Yes, the gentleman there. Do you have the mic?
Yes, thank you. I'm Safir Rizvi from NDMA. So my question is to the representative from Chile. So congratulations on your country for being so resilient to earthquakes. So given the Indian experience, you are what you are. You have reached where any country would want to reach. We are at a position where the fear of an earthquake is not as high as in Los Angeles or in Chile or in Taiwan. So we have a big problem that when we go to the municipalities, especially the smaller ones in the more remote areas, even if there is awareness, compliance is very poor. So apart from using the stick, is there any smart method of doing this?
Okay, sorry, I'm going to do something really terrible, but that's my job, to be the terrible person in the room. Could I ask you to be really, really short and then take forward the answer bilaterally? Because the clock's ticking and I have another set of people. So very quickly, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your kind regard and your question. This is actually sort of, I'm going to try to pull an answer from a matchbox when actually it's like an entire room of it. But I would say three key things. Get the science right, one, as a base. Two, get the construction codes right. It's not the earthquake that kills the people, it's the buildings that kill the people. And third, get your community preparation in place. That's the hardest, because it needs to be really, really capillary in the territory. It needs to have your municipalities involved, into even the community level involved. But that's the task at hand. And one of the things we found out over the years that actually does work very well is to put the first efforts, for example, into what you might find as multiplying actors within the territories. The schools, for example. Get the proper, the 5, 7 to 10 rule of thumb, advices, and set it them for the schools. Make the drills at the schools, so let the children teach the parents in terms of what to do. The same thing at the workplace. Let the worker be there watching that, and him for take it to the family and reinforce what the kids are actually knowing. So community preparation is key. So again, knowledge first. Second, basically the building codes. And third, community preparation. Yeah. It sounds really like a rule of thumb kind of thing. It's much more difficult, we all know that. And we're fortunate enough to be talking to Mr. Kishore to Kamal. And we're trying to open a line of cooperation with India, so we'll be glad to be discussing this further with our Indian partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that shortish answer. Thank you. Thank you once again. And now I'll ask you to take your seats so that I can invite the next lot. Okay, so now we heard from the governments. Now the other lot. I will start off. Here I'll invite the people in the room to take the stage. Mr. Abhilash Panda, Deputy Chief, Intergovernmental Processes, Interagency Cooperation and Partnership Branch, man, that is a mouthful, from UNDRR. Mr. Panda, there you are. Mr. Chris Hulot, the founder of Octopus Group, is virtual, as is Ms. Alexandra Galperin, Unit Head, Disaster Risk Management, Resilience, and Environment Cluster from the ADB. In the room also is Ranjini Mukherjee, Director, Research, Knowledge Management, and Capacity Development, CDRI. There you are again. I'm sorry, I seem to be a little blinded by the lights. And our online, do we get to see our virtual, there they are in front. I'm so sorry, I was looking at the back, but there you are right in front. So I'm going to start off with you, Alexandra. And my question to you is, we just heard from the various governments their experience of implementing this framework, but from an ADB perspective, from an MDB perspective, what are the challenges you have of increasing investment in resilience? I'm going to turn to Mr. Panda. We have seen the review of the midterm review of the Sendai targets, and I'm wondering, how do you see reporting from countries improving, or what more can be done to basically get resilience at the heart of disaster infrastructure and basically infrastructure in general?
Well, thanks, Rumi, for the question. But before that, big thanks to colleagues from CDRI for bringing us all together and putting us on over here to discuss this. Look, the target D of Sendai framework has two specific components. One has to do with critical infrastructure and the basic services. Now, infrastructure has a purpose. We don't build infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure, but the services it delivers. Between all the Sendai framework targets, there are 7 itself. The target D, which has to do with infrastructure, and the target F, which has to do with international cooperation, are the least reported. Now, we have to understand one thing. The Sendai framework monitoring is a government-led process, an intergovernmental mechanism behind it. There could be multiple reasons why this is happening. I mean, 2 of that we see coming out, and this is based on the 2021 data gap report on infrastructure that we had released. One of the issue is that infrastructure is not owned just by one ministry. There's various ministries involved in it. You will be talking to the Ministry of Road and Transport for something, civil aviation for something else, and maritime, and so on and so forth. And that is not getting most likely consolidated at one level in the government. Right? And as long as that's not getting consolidated, so it's also difficult for government to report on the losses of losses, or the duration of time that infrastructure has not been functional. Second, a big chunk of this is all privately owned. I mean, if you look at maybe digital infrastructure, mobile telephony network in itself, it's privately owned, and it's most likely a competitive data that we are looking at here. So it's a twofold matter, how this is getting consolidated and how does this bring up to the front. And if you link to the conversation that you were hosting with the panel members earlier, during the process of putting this framework in place, one of the thing that we are seeing is by bringing all these ministries together through the work that's happening in these countries and other, is this issue is getting addressed gradually. The big issue remains, which is how long will this take? If we don't have measurable data that's coming through right processes, it's also very difficult to put a value on how much it needs to be provided to replenish it or build it better or counter it. Now, we are in the process of putting together a panel of experts, hopefully very soon, who are going to tackle this and bring forward the 2025 analysis of the target D in itself. But this is also something that links to the work that happens around all the Sendai framework targets and gradually builds up on that. We're hopeful that governments bring forward this data in one way or the other, because it's also necessary for them, but it's also necessary for the investment community, because they are then able to bring forward what's required on the resources, because you will be able to see not just the losses, but the positive side of things, right? In a country or on a city, if the downtime is less, then it builds trust on the market, right? This is a good investable location of things. All right.
Okay, I'll come back to you actually again later, but let's try if Alexandra if we can now hear her. I can't hear you yet. Can somebody sort of, while that is happening, let me try with Chris Hewlett. The question I have for you is, first of all, let's see if you can hear, if we can hear you. Not
Can you hear
again.
me?
Sorry. I think we have resolved it now.
Are you able to
Hi.
hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. And as well. While hopefully Alexandra's queue has also opened up, but let me ask you this question. From your experience, what is required by the private sector to better account for disaster risk in their investment decisions? Basically, simply put, what does the private sector need for more money to flow into this area?
Absolutely. I think it's a really critical issue to address. And about a year ago, I joined the UNDRR's Advisory Council on Resilience. I think a really good initiative put together by Ablash and his team at the UNDRR. This is such an important thing that we need to shine some light on. And I think for the world's investment community, over the last few years, they've got very focused on issues like impact, sustainability, ESG. We've seen a big rise in measuring and assessing these kind of things. The SFDRR, the UNPRI, TCFD, the EU taxonomy, such a raft of acronyms. And I think for many investors, what we need now is to bring things back down to a more simplistic kind of level that allows people to focus on what actually will make a difference to tackling resilience. I think now is absolutely the right time to be raising awareness of this amongst the investment community. Resilience clearly means a raft of different things to different types of people across different countries, different asset classes. But we need to try and bring some common language. I think investors often assume that assets they're investing in are being built with a high level of resilience already designed into them. And that is often not the case. I think all too often developers cut corners, they try and avoid making things as resilient as they should. And I think actually the onus is on investors to know what are the right questions to ask and how can they play their part in making sure that assets are actually built to a much more resilient standard. We want investors to know how to do that. We want to equip them with the tools and the framework to be able to do that properly. Let me try and give you an example. At Octopus, a year or so ago, we created a new fund called the Octopus Sustainable Infrastructure Fund, and that was all about trying to use a resilience framework to assess the potential investments that we were making. Now, you might think that should be quite a logical thing to do. Don't all investors already do that? Actually, this was a fairly new concept. We couldn't find a suitable existing framework to use for the resilience assessment. So we actually created our own, and we did that by taking the UNDRR's principles for resilient infrastructure. And we use that to put together a questionnaire, which is now embedded in our investment process. We use it every time we look at a new investment. We use that to assess, do we think the company, do we think the developer has got the right approach to resilience? It also allows us then to go back and say, if you make these changes to this project, we then think it hits the right level of resilience, we are then able to invest. We've tried to keep the questionnaire fairly simple at this stage. I think in conjunction with the UN team and with other colleagues from other businesses involved in the Advisory Council, I think we'll be able to make this a more involved, more complicated questionnaire over time. But for me, the starting point is get the investment community used to thinking about resilience. It creates a discussion. It allows us, once we've invested, to also then be able to say, what are the things we want to now build into that asset to make it more resilient over time? You've just been talking about governance with your previous panelists. This allows us at board meetings to be able to track and assess how is the resilience of an asset improving. I think frameworks work best if they become widely adopted. They need to get to critical mass. That's what's happened with the PRI over the past 5 or 10 years. Every investor now thinks about that, which is brilliant. But we now need to go on the same journey when it comes to resilience. We need to be talking to other investors out there to start to develop this dialogue. We need fund managers to automatically think about resilience when they make investment decisions. It's quite early days, but I think a combination of investors like us, the UNDRR team and all the work of Ablash and his colleagues, some of the work we're all doing to try and talk to the big investors around the world, I think we can start to raise the awareness of resilience. And I hope that in future years, at events like this, we'll be able to point to some very clear progress.
Thank you. I want to come back to you once again later, but before I do that, I'll go to Alexandra. But I have a question for you I want to leave with you while I ask Alexandra for her inputs. It's one thing what the private sector could want to see to ensure, to make it easier to make more money flow into disaster resilience. But on the other hand, how is the private sector looking at disaster resilience itself? How does it define itself when it is looking inward or doing its planning and look at disaster resilience as an area? I'll come back to you with that, but in the meantime, I will try once again. Alexandra, maybe this time we'll be able to hear you. Is she offline? Sorry, I think maybe that, okay, sorry. So now that technology has kind of forced my hand to change up everything, let me turn to Ranjini. And, the framework that we have been discussing is one of the things that CDRI does, but disaster resilience is the key. It looks like, sorry, I'm going to go back to Alexandra because I keep saying I'll come back to you and then think. So Alexandra.
Shall we test?
I'm so happy. Do for you, or you have heard me say it many numbers?
There's definitely something wrong with the audio system, but I heard the question.
Great.
If you can hear me, I can
go ahead.
give you an answer. So first of all, I wanted to echo what some of the panelists from the government had said, and the first one was, it's the governments who implement. I would like to add, it's also the governments that set the priority. I would also like to echo the thoughts on the need for a multi-sector approach and for a shared understanding of risks. Now, coming to that, ADB works with member countries to address their development priorities and investment needs while strengthening their climate and disaster resilience. And we sit together in country partnership strategies that we define based on national development plans and priorities. So what we see in many countries that there is still not a sufficient understanding of the economic and social benefits on investing in disaster risk reduction. So coming back to what has also been already mentioned by one of the panelists, there's really a need for more science to address some of these information gaps. So there's two types of information that are currently missing. One is, the hardcore quantitative understanding of annual average losses and how that spreads out across different sectors. Our experience with some of these analyses is that it's really crucial to bring in the infrastructure sectors and other relevant ministries from the start of these exercises so that the results actually talk to their information needs and planning requirements, but also that we establish a common understanding of what the priority needs and problems are that need resolving. I think this is something that was mentioned before, this kind of ecosystem. And you can nurture that ecosystem through joint analysis of what some of the key issues are and how they could be resolved. It's the understanding also that each sector has a role to play. Another information gap that we're seeing is that many sectors have very insufficient data on the damages and losses that they are affected by. And there's also data gaps in terms of understanding the avoidable public expenditures on disaster response and recovery. So all of that together makes it more difficult to actually have this conversation on disaster risk reduction and prioritizing that in the allocation of investments. One more point, and also that was already mentioned, which we also from our experience are seeing quite a bit, is that in terms of the regulatory environment, there's really a big need to direct more attention to the subnational level, because the gaps may be there in terms of interpretation of codes, of adapting them to local contexts, and then creating the appropriate implementation regimes. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And technology permitting, we'll come back to you again. You know, Ranjani, we just heard from Alexandra that would be the ADB, so that's an MDB perspective, and we heard from Chris Hewlett, which is a private sector perspective. Now, in the context of all the work that CDRI is doing in this area of disaster resilience and resilient infrastructure, driving investment into it, the governance structure that is required, I'm wondering, how do you respond to the issues that they raise?
Thank you, Urmi, for that question. Let me divide my intervention into two parts, like some of the challenges that Abhilash highlighted or Alexandra are very something that we are also facing while working with our member countries. So of course, the lack of robust risk analytics is a huge gap. There is not a clear understanding of the risk. And even if wherever some risk modeling has been done, it is not available in an understandable and usable format. And because this information is not available in a usable format, we are not able to visualize the cost of inaction and also imagine the return on investment, that what will be the return if we actually invest on resilience. So that's there. Number two, again, coming to the biggest challenge is the governance. What we see is a large section of the infrastructure professional, the existing infrastructure professionals, are not trained to design resilient infrastructure. And so there's a huge gap in the capacity. And this huge gap is further compounded by weak codes. And even if wherever we have the codes quite strong, the issue is the compliance mechanism. So that exists on ground. And the third is the lack of resources for financing resilience. Because what we have seen, what the investors want to know, they're looking for fair return to investment, they want a stable regulations, they want strong governance and policies to be around, and physical security. And to provide all that, you need a strong governance structure. So these are the challenges. Now, coming to what CDRI is trying, how CDRI is trying to address that, we are actually working towards strengthening the governance for infrastructure resilience, and we are providing support to the countries to review their national resilience policies, strategies, and to see how resilience could be embedded. We are doing projects at different country level. We are providing technical assistance to countries. We are also working with government to strengthen their disaster risk financing architecture, and we are also working with financial institutions. Just to give an example, we are working with Reserve Bank of India to come up with a playbook which actually provides a very structured guidance onto financial institution and assessing the physical climate risks and how they can use that information while taking their lending decisions. So these are some of the interventions we are doing. There are more, but
of course.
I know the time is a bit constrained.
The clock is always ticking, and there's more to do than there is time or money. Mr. Panda, I wanted to sort of come back to you. One of the things, we kept hearing, it's like, it almost feels like, one's running around in circles and there's no breaking point there. I mean, there's data requirement, there's governance, and again, but all of that requires money. Where do you see that crack to enter and perhaps stop it from being us running endlessly in circles?
Oh, thanks for that. I don't think we are looking for a crack. We don't want a crack. Right?
No, I mean like a break. Like how do I break that chain where I'm chasing my tail all the time?
Got it, yeah. Look, there is a reason. I mean, I won't go into the details of what our colleagues from Chile, Madagascar, and Bhutan mentioned. But there was a reason why this work that you heard about earlier is taking place. Now, to the key to a lot of this to do with resilience or sustainability, invariable of if it's climate related or geophysical related, has to do with good governance and has to do with governance that's based on risk. It's a risk-informed governance, right? That unlocks a lot of these other issues. Now, the example that Luis was talking about on how it's been, how it's supporting Chile in opening up the, breaking over the silos, is a starting point of many things. We do not necessarily always have to go out of the books and start looking for resources. We have to start by looking at what's already there. Governments have resources. We are never saying that it's enough in entirety, but that's the starting point of things, because we cannot get the market to come. I mean, the example that Chris was giving, the work that Chris's team and our colleagues are doing on the Octopus funds, the infrastructure fund that they have put, and they have brought in the principles of resilient infrastructure as a criteria, is one of those examples where the market is willing to, but the market is only going to buy into it when they see the trust out there, right? So the governance, if it's rightly addressed, I mean, we don't necessarily, in our experience with working with countries, one thing that we have also realized is that risk is not static, it's dynamic, right? Today you construct a dam, you have already started talking about what's going to happen, downhill and upstream. So, we cannot always use one risk assessment that's done. So for instance, because of this work that, CDRI and UNDR have been doing in countries, some of the countries have now taken the stress testing as a mandatory requirement in the annual review processes of itself. So that builds the trust on the market.
So basically, there's a changing approach, and that is basically the way we stop running around in circles and actually getting things done. I mean, put simply, have I got that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, at one point of time, we'll have to take a stock of what's happening and what's not happening.
Yeah. Ranjini, on a similar vein, I mean, after all, this is a conference. We are here for the 2 days. We're talking about driving investment into resilient infrastructure. But one, it's, of course, therefore, the governance structures, the basic information has to be there, as we heard from Chris Hewlett. But on the other hand, there's also how do we ensure that the money gets retained, actually, that it's not like a one-time flow. So it's, as I think Alexandra had put it, resilience of investment in resilient infrastructure and resilience of investment. If you can sort of, given that CDRI actually works in that particular space of resilient infrastructure, I'm wondering, how do you see this struggle to, in terms of governance, what more can happen, what needs to happen?
So as I said, the challenge that we see, the foremost is the lack of understanding of the risk. And that's why CDRI has recently come up with a probabilistic risk model, ICDRI, which actually helps countries to understand the risk which is embedded in their infrastructure assets and at the system level. So once that understanding is there, and that is something Alexandra was also mentioning, the average annual loss, that actually helps government to start looking at things and see how they can address those risks by making in necessary, changes. So one is that. The second, of course, investment in sustained capacity. Because even if you know the risk, and even if you have the national policies and strategies to build resilience, you need capacity on ground to actually implement them. So a sustained investment on capacity would be extremely required if you really want to talk about building resilience, whether it is resilient infrastructure or infrastructure for resilience.
Right. So at the end of the day, you have to have the capacity and keep investing in the capacity.
Exactly.
To even ensure that all the, tick boxes of governance, which is data, better coordination, actually happens.
Exactly.
Right.
Thank you.
Chris, I wanted to return to you. You heard Ranjini speak about, how there is difficulty in understanding the risk that, how we understand resilience and its risks. I'm wondering, as somebody from the private sector, how do you see the private sector actually understanding this risk?
This is a really big challenge. I think traditionally, people have not really recognized that they have been building assets with far too low a level of resilience. I think we need to flip that on its head and make the case that building assets with much more level of resilience inherently built into them not only delivers better outcomes for countries, but also can deliver better outcomes for investors. Let me try and give you an example. Over the last 10 or 15 years at Octopus, we've built lots of renewable energy generation assets in many countries around the world. If we went back 10 years or so ago, we use fairly simplistic weather data to make assessments about things like flooding risk of a solar farm. And I remember one solar farm we built, we were told it had a 1 in 100 chance of flooding. It then had flooding issues for the next 2 years in a row, which the data would suggest you just shouldn't have happened. I think investors now are realizing you need to make better use of forward-looking data, not historic backward-looking data. And you also need to be willing to invest more upfront in building a better quality asset that people intuitively might think, well, that leads to lower outcomes for investors, but actually by boosting the resilience, removing issues like flooding, by raising an asset, another meter up, building your subterminal 6 feet above the likely water level, all of these things, they cost more, but they'll lead to greater availability of the asset, better outcomes for energy supply in that country, but also we think we can model that to show that that delivers better returns to investors too. And so actually everyone benefits from building a greater level of resilience into assets in that way. I just don't think this is the way the investment community has typically thought for many years. There's almost been a race to the bottom to build assets quickly and cheaply rather than to a really high standard. And we think now the time is right to really showcase better caliber assets built more thoroughly will deliver greater resilience and greater outcomes.
I just wanted to open up the floor for questions, if there are any. No? Okay. I see somebody right at the back. Could a mic reach the gentleman?
Yeah, this question is for Chris. My name is Avinash from CDRI. So, the returns are not very quantifiable in terms of adaptation when you compare it with mitigation. So, from a private point of view, from an investor point of view, how would you convince your investors, those that are putting in money into your Octopus fund, how would you convince them differently as to, communicating the benefits of, let's say, adaptation, resilience financing? Thanks.
It's a very good question. And I think it's still quite early in the community to really be able to understand why resilience is something they need to be thinking about. I've tried to use some of the examples that we've experienced over the years around where we have seen assets that weren't built to the right level of resilience and why that has led to actually very poor investor outcomes, as opposed to trying to build things in a different kind of way. We've, as I explained earlier, we've introduced our resilience questionnaire, which is a starting point to try and show the clients that I speak to around the world, the pension funds, the insurance companies, why this is something that they should think about, along with all of the other issues that they have on their plate, like ESG and SFDR and all of the kind of sustainability data that they now have to report on. I like to hope that maybe in 10 years' time, investors routinely report on the resilience of their assets in the same way that they report about carbon emissions. It will take a bit of time. At the moment, we're seeing some early adopters very keen to work with us on these kind of topics. But I know between private sector participants like myself and Abhilash and his team, I really hope that over the coming years we can raise awareness of this and start to use data to show that better caliber assets lead to greater outcomes for all concerned, not just for investors, but also better outcomes for the countries where those assets are built.
Is there another question in the room? No, I don't see anybody. Okay, we have just literally a couple more minutes, and I was wondering if I could finish off with some last thoughts from the two of you. Given that both your organizations are working together on this framework, but I was wondering, having heard the entire sort of range of people here today, what would be a key takeaway? What would be a key takeaway from all that you have heard?
Look, I mean, if we just take the example, or what the panels had mentioned before, and the work that's happening, this is in its initial phase of things. Right? It will take some time to see the results of itself. Now, as the UN works with the member states, so does the CDRI and the coalition of itself. We have to continue the journey with these member states. We cannot, it's going to take time, but we have to continue the journey with them. And gradually that would be the process for other countries to start adopting the process and making, going through the journey. And now, I'll just take 30 seconds to complement what Chris said to the question that came earlier from a colleague from CDRI. Now, on an example to give, we mapped one of the world's second largest pension fund and its physical financial assets throughout the world. We overlaid it with whatever hydrometeorological data we had with the climate scenarios that's available. It's interesting to see that a large chunk of these pension funds are highly exposed to risks, climate risks, but also geophysical risks in itself. Sometimes what happens is it's not the return that matters in those investments, it's the protection of these investments. And if we can together do that, bring that knowledge and that information forward to the investment community, they know what has to be done. The second thing is the interpretation of risk is different. The risk, what Chris would talk about, and the risk that we are talking here about is a bit different in itself. So that's a negative connotation at sites. We have to turn it into an opportunity. And the market is ready for it. As long as the governance is good, right. There is an investable pipeline, and it's actually monitored to be implemented.
Ranjini, again, as CDRI, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, a very quick comment. Better risk analytics, sustained investment on building capacities, and finally, having fiscal risk assessment tools and a robust disaster risk financing mechanism will be the way forward to build resilience of infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Given the climate-constrained times that we live in, actually time-constrained as well, got that little notice that said time's up. I think there's no end to this conversation. And clearly, what does come out clearly is that talking more and discussing more will give us better options, and to ensure that the focus remains. Because very often we talk about how much money is needed in the sector, how resilience of infrastructure has to improve, but we forget that key little thing called governance, perhaps because it's the hard work, the nuts and bolts. But thank you so much, all of you, both you, Chris and Alexandra, who joined us virtually. Thank you for your time. And Abhilash and Ranjini, thank you again. And thank you. I hope that this has been as interesting a session for all of you as it has been for me. Thank you. Sorry, back to you, Neha.
Representatives on the stage, Louis, Elisaha, and Bhavna, for the group photograph, please, and the certificates, please.